You bought an E36, it's bog standard. What do you do to it? What mods do you have to make your E36 better? If you've got an E36, you might have done some of these mods already. If you've not owned an E36, then some of these mods will be completely alien to you. So let's run down. I've got 5 bolt-on mods that will upgrade your E36, that will make it drive better, be faster, be more fun, more enjoyable. It's a no-brainer. Stay tuned. You've got yourself an E36, coupe, touring, saloon, convertible even, whatever. You want to know what you need to do to make that car drive better, be more responsive, be more engaging. That's the whole reason you bought an E36. It's not because you want tons of comfort or you want to cruise around and, you know, not drive it. It's a driver's car, right? So how do you take the soggy old standard 36 and make it drive properly? So to start off with, you're going to want a set of coilovers. There's tons of brands out there. Everyone sells them for an E36. You can spend 200 quid or $200 or, you know, $2,000, £2,000, whatever you want to do. You're not going to go far wrong whichever set you put on the car. My personal preference is a set of BC Racing. I like a divorced rear setup, so none of the true rear stuff. Not worth it for a fast road car, occasional track car in my opinion. So there's 2 things to consider when you buy these really from like an entry point. Is you want a set with camber adjustable front top mounts, so you can bring in the camber, which means you know, when you're driving the car at the limit, a bit more negative camber will give you a better contact patch when the car is under load. So you want camber top mounts. If you're clever, you can buy these ones from BC. Not this particular top mount, but you can get an M3 top mount, which is offset, which also increases the caster, which is good for road handling, fast road driving. So ideally caster, offset, camber top mounts. And then in terms of spring rate on the divorce setup, so on the front, I'd probably go 10Ks on a track car or 8K on a fast road car. On the back, the spring rate, usually we want to match the front to the back. So if we've got 10 on the front, go 10 on the rear. But that isn't like 10 on the front, it's about half the because of the motion ratio, it affects the spring rate. So real well, that's like a 5 kilogram rear spring, because we want the rear to be softer so that when we load the rear axle up, you know, that we get the weight transfer and it loads up the rear end. So yeah, we want a 10 on the front in my opinion, 10 on the rear. That's a good track setup. Maybe 12 if you've got an aggressive tyre fitment, but a lot of the spring rate is personal preference. If you wanted just a soft road setup, you probably go like, I don't know, 6 up front, maybe like 8 in the rear. That would be lovely and smooth, but not great for track, be too soft. So coilovers, that's your first thing. Get those sorted. Number 2. What's number 2, I hear you ask? Well, number 2 is diff. Not be able to hold this up for long, but basically you want either a limited slip diff or a welded diff. Why do we need that, I hear you ask? Well, if you've got a standard 36, most of them have an open diff in it, which basically means power is sent through the prop shaft and then divvied out by the differential, and usually it will just spin one wheel. So if you're trying to drive the car in wet conditions, you know, low grip conditions, or sometimes even just with general driving, what it will do is if you load up the rear end too much, one wheel will spin, you won't have a lot of grip, and also it can be quite unpredictable. So get yourself diffs, or a diff sorted, a limited slip diff, or weld your diff. There's a whole world we can dive into with those. So you can look at shorter ratio diffs. So depending on what engine setup you've got, this is quite a broad spectrum, but generally speaking, if you run a higher ratio diff, or higher number, so if the stock is like if you've got a 328, your stock diff will be a 293 if it's a factory manual. For a fast road track car, you want to shorten that ratio right up. So you want to go up to like at the bare minimum, like a 315 medium case. If you're in the US, I think you can get a 346 or something like that. Don't quote me, I'm not super clued up on the US stuff. But basically, shorter ratio will give you faster acceleration. It will just wake the car up, it will feel more lively. Trade-offs are obviously you lose a bit of motorway cruising. You know, the revs will increase at motorway speed, so you might lose a little bit of fuel economy, a bit more noise in the cabin when you're cruising at motorway speeds like 80 miles an hour. But if you don't go too crazy with the ratio, then you'll be fine. So my personal preference is to get a 315 medium case diff, and that's fine for virtually all applications. It's a good balance of like increased RPM, you know, so it's not too much RPM when you're cruising on the motorway, but it gives you a nice bump in acceleration no matter what engine size you've got. So if you've got a 323, 325, 328, that kind of stuff. So yeah, differential is a must. You can either go limited slip or you can go welded. Obviously limited slip diffs are much nicer because they're much less intrusive and you're much less likely to break shafts, but you've got to factor in rebuilding it. They're all 20, 30 years old, so it will need a rebuild. If you go welded diff, it's cheap and cheerful, but you will get a lot of skipping, hopping around at low speeds when you're in car parks and stuff, so it's a bit embarrassing. But yeah, if you're on a budget, welder's fine. If you've got a bit more money and you want to build something a bit nicer, get yourself a limited slip diff, put some extra plates in it, stuff like that. So that's my second go-to. The third thing, probably the next most crucial, is bushes. Bush. So there's quite a lot of bushes on the E36, all in different places, all do different things. If money's no object, obviously you just do the lot, no brainer. For a lot of people, obviously budget plays a big factor these days, so there's kind of like a first level of bushes that you must do on a 36, in my opinion. So obviously if your rear subframe bushes are shot, they'll need replacing, but if you're trying to tighten things up on a budget without spending tons of money, there's two places really you need to upgrade the bushes. The first being the lollipops. So these things here that control the front control arms. So factory, these have a rubber bush, which is pretty sloppy, not particularly good for like vehicle control when you're driving like fast or on the limit. So what you can do is swap them out for like a polyurethane bushing like this. This is a good upgrade and you won't sacrifice any ride comfort, anything like that. So this is a must-do upgrade in my opinion. Just to mention, there is two types of bush that you can run here. This is for like a sort of casual, you know, you just want to tighten things up. But if you're really clever, what you'll do, I haven't got one to hand, but Powerflex and other brands do them. You can get an offset bush. So rather than the hole being in the middle, it's got the hole here. And what that does is that increases the caster on our front geometry, which again, caster is great. Basically, the dark arts of caster is it allows when you're under load and you're going through the steering, so you're at half lock. Basically, it increases the amount of negative camber the wheels have. So your contact patch under load becomes greater, which is a winner when you're driving the car fast, but it stops you having to run tons of negative camber, you know, which would detract from your straight line braking and stability. So caster is good. There's not really any trade-offs, you know, to running too much caster. The only thing to mention is if you run too much caster, which you wouldn't from just these, if you run too much caster, it will start to push the wheel forward in the wheel well and you can have clearance issues. So that's something to factor in. But just with running caster top mounts on our coilovers and caster bushes, you know, with these, you'll be fine. So get plenty of caster in there. So that's my third bolt-on bush upgrade. So that's the front. That's the absolute must you do. But on the rear, there is also another pair of bushes which is critical to the wheel's ability to stay consistent under load. And that is on our rear control arm. So if you look in here, this is the nice solid Powerflex bush. This bush, if it's shot, a few of you may have driven cars that kind of feel like the rear end wobbles, and that's because this bush is shot and basically under load it's doing that. So we want to make that a nice solid bush, no movement, and that will give you greater control and confidence when you're driving the car on the limit. So that's an absolute must. So if you're going to do two bushes on the car, do the lollipops and do the front bush on the rear trailing arm. Something to mention, when you're upgrading those rear bushes on the trailing arm, poly isn't the absolute best bush you can use. There is even better. Ideally, you want to put a spherical bearing in. So if I just show you on this, so ideally you can use the OEM spherical bearing that you get in the top. You can put that top and bottom for increased feel. This is great. These are cheap. You can put these up for like 20 quid a bush. They're sealed. They last forever. On the front, ideally, we could do with running a similar bush to here on this. I know for guys in Europe, you know, such as myself, I haven't yet found an off-the-shelf solution that doesn't cost the earth. So at the moment, this poly bush is probably the best thing I would suggest if you're in the UK. Now, if you're in America, I believe you can use a Toyota Camry bush. But I haven't tested it. I don't know anything about it. I've just seen a few guys online suggesting it. So if you're in the US, that's probably the better bush to use, because I believe it's a sealed unit. It's not super expensive, and actually, you know, it's a win-win. The only reason I use poly in the UK is because we don't have a cheap off-the-shelf solution to run a spherical bearing up front. So that poly bush is kind of the next best thing at the moment. But someone might come up with a cost-effective solution. I believe there's a company out there that do bush. I think it's like 350 quid, which obviously is quite an expensive upgrade. So for the average road user, forget the last 2 minutes of what I've been talking about. Just stick the poly at the front, as per what I've done here, and then grab your poly for the lollipops, and you'll be well away. Upgrade number 4. Where would I spend my money next? Well, there's 2 places left to go. So let's look at the first one, which is our shifter. If you've driven a BMW, a manual BMW from E30, E36, E46, E90, anything from that era, you'll know that the gear sticks are like that, sloppy as hell. Basically, everything likes to wear and people just don't renew it. It's a bit alien to some people. Until you start to geek out with these cars, then you'll understand how simple it is to upgrade stuff. But essentially, you've got a selection of bushes. Let me grab one. So this is what's on your car at the moment. And you basically have a bush on the chassis that lives here, a bush in here, and then you have like a socket that lives on the back of the gearbox. And you've also got a plastic housing that the shifter itself sits in. So you can either go with a chassis mount shifter, and what that does is that removes this, and all you're left with is the slot from the factory gearbox joint. I haven't got one to hand. Actually, I might have, bear with me. Found one. So this is the factory joint that's on the back of the box, and these basically end up with a ton of play, and they sort of go like that side to side. That's what a lot of the slop is. So that lives sort of on there and then on the back of the gearbox. So you've got 2 options. The first is your chassis mount. Does away with most of this crap. Gives you a real direct shift because it only uses the lower rod. I'd also replace this. This is a BMW part. It's about 50 quid to replace it. And you'll have lovely tight shifts. The only trade-off is it's so aggressive. And for like a road car, not ideal for everyone's circumstances. I prefer like an OEM shifter. So what I tend to do is, no matter what the car is, unless you've got a E36 M3 Evo, because I don't think it'll fit, every other car, whether you've got 328, 323, 318 IS, you can bin off the stock upright, this piece here, and you can swap in a Z3M shifter. That's got a shorter throw, so that will shorten up the throw massively, but still retains the top bar. So you get an element of sort of smoothness without being too notchy. When you install that shifter, you can upgrade the rear bush to a poly if you want. You can either get a BMW part, which is rubber, or a Powerflex part, which is polyurethane. You can replace this front bush, because these wear and you get slot there. Again, you can buy that from BMW, or you can put a Powerflex bush in there, which will last longer in theory. And then always, no matter what shifter you do, replace this, because this sloppy jalopy is no good. So like I say, they're about 50 quid or maybe 45 pounds, something like that. And that tightens that up. So in my opinion, I like the Z3M shifter, but lots of people love the chassis mount because they're quite direct when you're driving the car on the limit. But yeah, upgrade your shifter. As I say, if you've jumped in any BMW built in the last 30 years that's a manual, that's got over 100,000 miles on it, you'll know how sloppy these shifters get. So upgrade your shifter. finally, what's the 5th upgrade that I would do as an entry-level E36 owner? Well, steering rack. If you've driven your 36, you'll know the stock steering, lock to lock is so long. You can't really drive the car that fast without having to hang off the steering wheel when you're going around corners. So there's lots of racks out there that will fit the car without too much buggering around, but there is better choices and worse choices. So ideally there's 2 racks you want to look for. The cheapest and easiest to find is probably an E46 purple tag rack. You might have heard it, you might have seen people talk about it. It's got, I don't know the ratios off the top of my head, but it's a shorter ratio, quicker rack. You can pick them up for about 50, 60 pounds, super cheap, and that will wake the steering up, so you're having to put less effort in, or you get more turning for your effort, I should say. So I think the lock to lock might be slightly shorter and the ratio is shorter. So that's a winner. The ultimate rack to put in there, in my opinion, is using a Z3 rack. It doesn't need to be off a Z3M, it can be off any Z3. It looks like this, and it's got a slightly different housing, so it looks a bit different to a 36 one. But this is the quickest rack that you can buy. They're not too hard to find just yet. You can pick them up for about £100, £150, something like that. And these are super, super quick. So you chuck one of these in after going from a standard 36 rack, and your 36 will feel like a go-kart, no questions asked. There's not really any trade-off. Some people say, oh, it makes the car feel a bit skittish because the steering response is so good. But in my experience, it's not a problem. I'm happy with them. When you fit these, or when you fit the 46 purple tags, you still continue to run the E36 inner and outer tie rods. There's no issue there. Straight on, very little modification required. The only thing I ever do is the bracket on the front, where the steering cooler lives, is in a different place. So you just have to make a little steel bracket, nothing too fancy, if you want just to keep the line in place. It does sit there happy enough, but it's nice to put a little bracket on there. If you've driven any of these cars, you'll know that some of those upgrades, you can go way beyond that and play with these cars more and more. But that's a good starting point to throw a bit of money at the car without spending tons of money. So, depending on your coilovers, you're going to spend a few £100 or up to £1,000. But let's say you're doing it on a budget, buy a £200 set of coilovers, a cheap set of camber top plates, your shifter, your diff. You should be able to do most of these upgrades for about £1,000, maybe £1,500, depending on how, if you pick up stuff second hand or if you buy it new. But that's my go-to, how to, sort out your 36, make it drive nice without spending tons of money. You can spend way more money, way more time digging into this and going further and further, but that's how I would start if I had a fresh 36, I had a tight budget and I wanted to get the most of my money, most bang for buck, as they say. That's where I would spend my money. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this one. If you want to see more like this, comment below, and I will see you in another video. Peace.